Hello, hello, and welcome to episode 24 of Trails in the Pod. I'm Colin. That's Kevin.
Colin, I need you to do me a favor, young adventurer. All of my mead is gone. Would you like a quest? Please gather that is five, elderberries from the forest and bring them to me so I can make my mead.
It's funny because I'm pretty sure that you're making a joke about open world games. My mind's instantly going to MMOs, which I guess is almost like the original open world game that we have not mentioned at all in our planning document.
That brings us to the topic of today's episode open world versus linear storytelling in RPGs for the most part, but in video games as a whole.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that it's important, especially for this, that we do bring into account insights from other kinds of genres, just because it can shed a light on how open world games are designed.
First, I think we should not only define the terms, but also discuss are they a useful categorization? Does it help us to separate games into these two broad categories?
Labeling sets expectations, and not just for the player, but for the critic as well, or for people who are then reading criticism. If something is labeled as a linear game versus an open world game, the expectations that you have for that game are going to vary widely. I know I agree with you that there are useful distinctions at a very broad level. Like Grand Theft Auto is clearly a more free, you're able to explore and take content in the pace that you want versus something like the original Dragon Quest, which is very railroaded. You have one path to get to the end of the game, and then you beat the game. But once we start getting into defining those terms more specifically, I mean, you have to start asking what's the difference between an open world or an open zone game. At what point do we say that an RPG with world maps that you can go in and out of is that an open world game? It gets more complicated.
Exactly. Open world games, they've been super common for the past 10, 12, 13 years in RPGs. Some would say, and I'm one of them, full disclosure, a bit too common. But what is an open world game? Most of the time, I think that we would define it that the player can choose what to do, where to go, and when. That this idea of choice and freedom is pretty central. But where do we draw the line? Open world versus, say, a pretty expansive linear storytelling. Like you played Fallen Order, right, Colin?
Yeah,
That's pretty open, isn't it?
it's open for exploration, but I think by bringing up that game, I think that you bring up a good point and that will help us make a distinction. Outside of like, okay, there's a new location that has opened up, you can go explore it. There's no real side quests. You have the main story, maybe a thing here and there, but it's not like you can go off and say, you know what, there are more stories in Kashyyyk that I want to explore. Let me go spend 20 hours on Kashyyyk. Whereas if you play even a game like Yakuza, which has a much smaller world, you have the ability to look at the main quest and say, nah, I'm going to put this to the side for a moment. Not all the time, but most of the time, you can just put it to the side for a moment and go walk around Camarocho, talk to this crazy guy or talk to this crazy guy, or go to the arcade or go to the batting range or do whatever. It's the ability to set the pace of the story by yourself. You set the pace of it by replacing it with meaningful content.
Okay, so can I ask a two-part question then?
Yes.
So, one, are we coming to the conclusion that side quests, the ability to do them when and in place of the main quest, is a necessary and sufficient condition? And two, by this definition, if I can be a bit extreme and
Yep.
maybe a bit uncharitable, Colin, does that make Trails in the Sky SE an open world game? And I know you say no, most likely, but
Yeah,
by
I
this
will.
definition, it does feel a bit open world. You can go within certain parameters within a couple, say five, six maps, the town and the overworld.
Yeah, but I think that also, like we talked about the open part of it in terms of controlling pacing. There
Yeah.
also has to be a consideration of the volume. I mean, there's a couple of side quests you can do before the main quest in SC or FC, sure. But at a certain point, you have to go and do the main quest. Otherwise, there's no more fun to be had with it. This is where we get money because in most open world games, eventually you run out of shit to do. But it's the amount of stuff that you can do that's better, and it's or that's bigger, and it's also the volume of space that you can go around that's bigger. If Trails in the Sky SC had a thing where you could just port on over to Grand Cell and do some side quests there in the fifth chapter, then we might have an actual discussion going.
It shows the permeability of these labels, these definitions that we're using, how it's not 0, 100. It's a lot of mixing stuff that borrows each from the other. And we
Oh yeah,
get to about, say, the 50 mark, it gets real complicated to say this or that.
yeah. I mean, there are some games that are very, very, very open. There are some games that are very, very linear. Although I would say at this point, most of the very, very linear games are very old games in which the openness just is not feasible with game design principles of that time. Nowadays, it's difficult to find an RPG that is exclusively one or the other. Or at the very least, it's difficult to find a linear RPG that does not have some elements of open world design, even if it's just, hey, head back to your hometown. There's a side quest waiting for you, and you can go do that if you'd like. I do want to make it clear because it's sounding like I'm saying that side quests are a necessary condition for open world games. They are a common part of open world games, but I don't think that they are necessary. I'm thinking back to Grand Theft Auto 4. I think that there are side quests in that in which you can have random events on the street. As a kid playing it, I almost never actually did those, which tells me that I could still have the same amount of open world fun with that game without doing any of the side quests and only doing main stuff. But Grand Theft Auto is a quintessential expression of the open world format because it the player can go ahead and just do what they want to do. You want to go and kill people and have the cop chase after you? Have at it. Trails, you can't just walk behind a random NPC and smack them with a stick.
No, you can't. As hilarious and perhaps tempting as it would be sometimes, it is a linear game. But is this the correct term? Is this the right label? Because it seems to me it's kind of pejorative, this negative connotation.
I personally don't see any pejorative meanings to linear. That doesn't mean that people don't mean it pejoratively. And I think that, you coming to the conclusion that linear can be seen as pejorative or might have pejorative connotations is because you and I both grew up in gaming at the time in which open worlds were what you had to do to be successful, and that linear was seen as a bad thing. When I'm thinking of like the word medieval. We use the word medieval in English in this awful way. And yet, both you and I know that the Middle Ages are fascinating. There are really interesting things in there, and it should not be used pejoratively. But I will still continue to use the word medieval to describe things from the years 500 to 1500. In the same way, I will use linear to describe linear games, but I don't mean anything bad by it. We've discussed numerous times on this podcast how sometimes having decisions taken away from the player helps storytelling cohere.
Maybe it's because I'm a boring person with no imagination. But when the game says, here, Kevin, go make your own fun, I'm like, oh God, I play games to escape my boring reality of life.
I think that you've just brought up a really interesting thing. Let's set the linear games aside for a second. There's a distinction we also have to draw between open world games and sandbox games. You play a Skyrim, yes, it's a huge world. You can go everywhere you want. But when you go to a town, there's going to be quests there. There's going to be content for you to do that's been designed by the developers for you to consume. You play a Minecraft, you play a Crusader Kings 3, you play a Europa Universalis 4. It's not quite the same. Minecraft is different than the two strategy games, but what is true about all of that is that in those
Hmm.
games, there are no set goals. It's you have to enjoy the process.
And I think some people would sneer and say Skyrim is closer to a sandbox than an open world, given the lack of RPG elements. They would call it a dungeon crawler with added aesthetics. And leaving that aside, for me, I cannot stand the lack of story in Skyrim. But in Paradox games, those two you just mentioned in particular, I find the freedom the best part about it. I don't have any issue creating a narrative, setting end goals, and then going out to get them.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's a topic for a different sidebar if we can think about what it means to create your own story in a Paradox game. Because you're right. I mean, I don't play Minecraft because I tried for 20 minutes and I was like, what am I supposed to do? This is really boring. Why would I want to just build stuff? Same reason I don't play Animal Crossing. But I think that with these strategy games, it's much more easily approachable in terms of you can see what goals you want to set, and then you can figure out how to achieve them, and it feels more cohesive than just saying, okay, here's a game in which you can go build a house if you like to do that. Go for it. We can more easily understand geopolitics and conquering other nations and stuff like that.
Is it fair to say that both of us prefer linear games?
I think I prefer linear games, sure. I'm kind of surprised to hear you say that.
Oh, I've talked about it on a number of times. I trust, and if that trust is not repaid, I am all the more quick to drop the game. The game developers, the writers, the director, to craft a story and tell it how they want, and I will find that more engaging than them dropping me in an open world RPG and say, go create your own story. To me, that feels like it's the developers skimping on the writing, on the plot.
See, I think the reason why I'm surprised to hear you say this is because when we do these sidebars, both of us have a pool of games from which we draw examples, right? I pull a lot from older JRPGs, maybe some platformers from time to time. You often will draw from CRPGs, Divinity, KOTOR, which don't fall into this category, although there are some open elements in them to be sure. But you also pull a lot from Bethesda titles. And to me, Bethesda is like the definition of a really boring open world.
Let me say this. I loved the main story and the DLC story of Fallout 4. No, I mean, Fallout 4 had four competing visions that were not reconcilable. I thought it was great. You're forced to pick a side among all of them have kind of good points. I thought the open world element allow you to go and meet the world, meet the people, and then decide based on all this, which vision do I support? It added depth and weight to your choices in the end. And I'm talking about story and choices and plot. So I like the linear story plot narratives part about the games.
But I think that you bring that up, I think opens up a really interesting line of inquiry, which is so like when I think about the distinction between open world and linear, I'm instantly going for gameplay, right? It's why
Yeah.
I was talking to you before in the podcast about how we got to talk about platformers, we got to talk about Sonic Frontiers and stuff like this. Because gameplay wise, there's a lot of similarities and a lot of interesting things there. But what is interesting about an RPG is that the world you inhabit is both impacted by the story and impacts the story. And so I want you to kind of expound upon the thoughts you just had there. What like could Fallout 4 make those same decisions meaningful for you if it was a completely linear game? Or is open world a requisite part of its ability to tell its narrative?
I think it could be as A to B to C all the way to Z kind of game if, and it's predicated on this, you went all about the Commonwealth, doing side quests, collecting characters who gave their thoughts on the political situation to you. But that would mean there'd be an order to encountering the four different factions, and there is a rough order for most people. It's the Minutemen, it's the Railroad, then the Brotherhood of Steel, then the Institute. So you could crystallize that.
But by crystallizing it, you're then also kind of guiding the player's perceptions of these different factions, right?
Yeah, and so that's a really tough question to answer, as in what makes this game successful? Would it be as successful if it was in a different kind of storytelling? And for what other games can we say? Would they be successful more or less successful if they were open world and transformed, or vice versa? I don't know. I think so for Fallout because for me, the stuff I love is the plot and story. And that's what linear does. What are some games? Can we think of any that would be better if they were open world?
Well, I think that the obvious answer coming to my head, by the time this podcast comes out, we'll know if it's true or not. But Pokemon, Pokemon is a very linear game, but even from
Yeah.
the beginning, it kind of stresses the importance of creating your own narratives in terms of finding your team and doing the exploration and yada yada. And what kid playing Game Boy when they were 5 didn't dream of being Ash and becoming the Pokemon master? I mean, to me, that was an open world game and that was my first game. But somehow it's taken till last year when Legends Arceus made an open zone Pokemon game, which was like, holy shit, this is amazing. And it really does make it feel more alive. Now, by the time this comes out, we will have had an open world Pokemon game. And I'm very interested to see how successful it is. I have very high hopes, but I'm also a little bit nervous.
Is this the obvious answer for this franchise because the story, the plot of Pokemon is not the driving force?
It's not the driving force. And there are some games in which they try to make it the driving force, but their storytelling abilities aren't good enough to do that. They got close with Pokemon Black and White, but Sword and Shield is a very narrative-driven game, and the narrative sucks to the point where all of the interesting stuff happens off screen because the game, to its credit, points out you're 10, you should not be involved in this. Which yes, but also that we don't know what's going on. So it's a bit of a problem. But I think that open world for Pokemon is the obvious choice because almost for reasons outside of the games, but that is the spirit of Pokemon. It's a hard question.
It is. I think it's harder than the other way around. Like, I think Skyrim would. No,
You
the
can't.
issues with Skyrim extend.
I think with Skyrim, its open worldness hide its flaws to an extent that you can still get some enjoyment out of it. If it was a
Yeah.
linear game, you would see how skin deep everything is immediately.
No, I would counter that Skyrim is skin deep because it's open world, mile wide, inch deep. I don't know. I can't think of any, to be honest. I don't want to sound like I dislike open world games. There's good stuff. How many times have I opened up an open world game, fucked about for 15, 30 minutes, an hour, and then closed it? That's a lot harder to do with linear games.
I mean, you can't really do it. I mean, I couldn't imagine pulling up Trails in the Sky SC, fucking around for 30 minutes, and then going off.
Or create or doing a new save file.
Yeah. So my most recent open world game that I've been playing was Assassin's Creed Origins. I got some problems with this plot structure. As a historian, especially as somebody who has taught a class on Hellenistic Egypt, I fucking loved his historical background and the ability to go and explore a village and see what stories they're being told there and really get immersed into the world. And that immersion is something that we really have to talk about. But what I could find that I could do in that game is say, all right, I'm going to play for an hour. I'll do a couple of quests, make some progress, and then go to bed. Whereas with Trails, like when I'm playing SC for the show, it's that evening I am playing through that chapter.
And these games are meant to be consumed in pieces. You go with a goal of, I want to do this. You go and do it, explore it, side quest, like you said, or grind. You save it and you go on. Maybe 6 months go by, you do a new character, a new save, and that's fine. That's expected almost.
See, that is so foreign from my way of playing games that to me that is not fine. But I mean, I guess everybody plays it the way that they want. I do want to look at the disadvantage. 'Cause it seems to me that the way that we are describing how one approaches an open world game, if we're just taking it as you play for an hour, you do some stuff, and you come back a little bit later, you do some other stuff. That means that even if it takes you the same amount of time as a regular RPG in terms of time played, it's going to take you a lot longer in terms of active days that you have played. In terms of the real estate it takes up in your mind is going to be a lot longer because of the way that you are approaching it. And to me, something that I think I've noticed when I play open world games like that is I get fatigued. Eventually, I'm like, I don't want to play this anymore. I want to go and play this other game. And I know I have friends who will play the beginnings of a lot of open world games and never finish them because they get sidetracked really fucking quickly and don't approach it as they would a linear game.
How do you beat an open world game that allows you to continue on after the main quest has been resolved one way or the other. Inherent within them is there's no ending at which the game gives you a black screen.
Yeah, I mean, you have to decide when you're done. There are credits. To me, that marks when a game is done. This is not true for all games, of course, but Legends Arceus is definitely not the case. But for most games, if I finish the main quest and I hit credits, if I want to go and play after that, fine. But that I have beaten that game.
Yeah, and open world, I think fatigue is a really good way of talking about it because a lot of us, at least me, I don't beat these games. I get tired of them, sometimes forever, sometimes for a period of time when I come back, but I don't beat them. I don't think of them as being beat.
I do beat them, but what happens is that, like, at first I start off patient, and every quest that comes my way, I take. And then eventually I'm like, okay, I'm done with this. Let me start just mainlining the main quest. That's how I beat Assassin's Creed Origins. And what there are two things that were revealed to me by doing that. One is I'm still missing like half the content of the game because there are a lot of side quests that I did not do. And for all I know, they could be amazing. I have no idea. I have no desire to go check them. On the other hand, these main quests, at least in Assassin's Creed Origins, and I think it's true for a lot of games, though not for The Witcher 3, is that the main quest is not a big priority for the developers and for the writers. They expect you to take it a chapter at a time as a way to like move things forward. Once you play the main quest in Assassin's Creed Origins, one after the other, you realize how really dumbly written it is. No, I'm serious. Like it has moments of like where you should be emotionally impacted by a character's actions, and I'm wondering, when did this change happen? What at what point did you develop the fact that Bayek and Aya actually don't love each other anymore? Like, it comes out of fucking nowhere, and you can fill those blanks in if you think about the fact that Bayek has been going around Egypt for the past 2 months. If you've been doing that in real life, but you've been playing one mission after the other where they fucked in one mission and now they have renounced themselves. It's whiplash.
It does not feel earned. Like you said, the game expects you to create the scaffolding to make it feel emotionally resonant. By not doing it themselves, if you just do it in order, it sounds like the game subtly punishes you for not doing a lot of side quests because you don't have the emotional believability, the depth to the relationship that you have to construct in your head on your own.
I think it, like, at least for this game, it came off to me as the developers remembering, oh yeah, we're supposed to be telling the story about the origin of the Assassin's Brotherhood. Let's shove this in real quick at the end. I don't know if that's a commentary on the writing of open world games or a commentary on the writing of the new Assassin's Creed games, where they seem very much just interested in making historical RPGs, which I'm a fan of, and then remembering that they have an entire series they're also trying to support. In a way, like, moments like that to me indicate that open world games have a tendency to not respect the time of the player by expecting the player to invest all of his or her effort and time into uncovering the content, and then the content does not match the amount of time investment. It might match the amount of effort put in. These tend
Yeah.
to be pretty easy games because you can always get a little bit stronger, and you often will out level things around you because you've been playing side quests and stuff. But in terms of the actual time that you've been putting in, it doesn't feel like the developers respect the amount of time that you put into it. And I don't know how you solve that problem, to be honest.
One, do you auto scale, which kind of makes stuff seem you're running in place? Everything you do is to not fall behind. So it's like, why fucking bother?
I mean, I hate level scaling. Like, I don't like it personally. I see the problems that it solves. It solves this problem in terms of, if you're able to overwhelmingly outlevel everything, the world stops being dangerous. Therefore, you can just like plow through everything, no problem. On the other hand, one of the best parts of RPGs is the feeling that you get stronger. And if your enemies are also getting stronger, you're not getting stronger. It's like if your boss gave you a buck pay raise, and then McDonald's also increased the value of all of their stuff by $1. You actually have not earned any more money once you convert that into real value.
Let me say a franchise I think mixes open world and linear very well.
Okay.
And we can talk about that and then see, well, one, if you agree, and then dissect it a bit, see how does it make it mesh, the combination.
Sure.
Mass Effect?
Okay, you're going to have to explain to me how I've not played Andromeda, and I don't think that you have either. And there
No.
are actual open areas there.
One,
But
two,
in the
three.
but in the trilogy, how are these open world?
You can choose, for one, you have a lot of choice when to do the companion missions in Mass Effect 2. Within various structured portions, sections of the game, you can do these before here. You can do these before the collector ship, and so forth. Mass Effect 3, same thing. Story missions, and within between them, you have the choice or to do or not do various side quests. I think it's open, so it's not open world, but like open, I think would open zone be an apt
No,
description?
it would not be open zone. I see where you're coming from though, because
Yeah.
you are choosing the order that you approach things. It's linking to the definition I presented of choosing your own pacing. That's certainly the case. But I think here we've run into the question of does open like are Western RPGs too core just open world by design? Because what you're describing is the classic formula of various CRPGs. KOTOR, for instance, has an area which you can choose which location
Yeah.
you want to go to first. Dragon Age Origins also has the same thing. These are not open world games, but they are open to some extent. They're more open than, say, Final Fantasy IV.
Something to keep in mind.
To me, when I say that open world versus linear is a useful distinction at the margins, or when we're talking about abstract concepts, it's because like there are different ways of telling stories. They are different ways of interfacing with your game. But once
Yes.
you get into the nitty gritty, I mean, openness is just an independent variable that you can put into games. Games can be more or less open. That doesn't have to mean that they are open world or more or less open world. They can just be open.
Yeah. So we have two axes, open and closed. And what is the openness acting on? Like I said, these games are not open world, but they are fairly open.
Yeah, they have to deal with this level structure problem too. I'm thinking specifically of Dragon Age Inquisition, or not Inquisition, of
Yeah.
Dragon Age Origins, in which because you can go to any of these places as you want, so they have to make the enemies scale in a certain way so that you still have challenge. I don't mind it as much there
No.
because, and I think it's an interesting question to ask why that is, but it's like, okay, I pick a path and now I'm going on that path. And I'll run some side quests here and there, but I'm not like bouncing back and forth.
I think I know,
Okay,
or at least let me give a hypothesis.
sure.
Because it impacts the story so much where we go, and even sometimes the order, but we can see the allies we get to fight the blight or whatever. And that's referenced in other parts of the game and the small talk, whatever. So it feels meaningful, even if the difficulty of us playing the game kind of is a constant, though some parts are easier and some are harder. We see the outcome and how it's meaningful and it changes the game. Whereas a lot of open world RPGs, because it's so segregated from each other, the main story, the side quest, whatever, it feels like what we did was not meaningful. And so it highlights us to focus on it is the same difficulty, but I'm not getting anything or much out of it.
So for you, the distinguishing factor is that in a classic CRPG or a BioWare game, it's a one cohesive experience that you can approach in different ways, but it's one experience. Whereas with an open world game, by design, it's kind of like a buffet where you go and you pick what you want to do.
And I'd say more if the story pays off, if it's good, I'm more likely to be this story is great. I can't see where it goes from here. Whereas if I'm like, wow, this story kind of sucks. I'm not distracted by that, so let me ruminate a bit on wow, this combat system also kind of sucks.
I think I'm losing the plot a little bit. I was trying to get at why level scaling works in a BioWare game and doesn't work, say, in Skyrim?
because I don't concentrate on the difficulty experience if I'm captivated by the plot, by the characters, by the story. Focuses my attention.
Okay, I think I see where you're going from there.
Yeah.
As somebody who actually does not like Dragon Age that much, even though I should, I think with Mass Effect the difference lies in that even if the actual difficulty does not change, as you level up, you get additional skills that make you feel like you have more answers for problems. There, and we do see the evolution of different enemy types as you go through these games. So it's not like it's completely stagnant in the way that a Skyrim is, in which you kill a bandit at level 1, the same way you kill a bandit at level 50. In Mass Effect 3, you have different weapon types, you have different biotic abilities, you have new enemy types like banshees, for instance. We've talked about how that somehow that's the final boss of the game is 3 banshees, but they require you to have different answers to them.
Yeah, the how you approach them is different. And the boss fight, I mean, that boss fight was annoying. But at least for me, outside of those areas, the gameplay was different, but the I guess mental concentration, the mental fatigue I was incurring was pretty constant, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think it does. Yeah.
And for the most part, I thought that was good for Mass Effect. It was fun.
So far in our discussion of open world games, what we have discussed are the flaws of open world games and compared them to better games that are not open world games. So I am curious, what positive things can we say about? I mean, you talked a little bit about Fallout 4, but there is a reason why this genre took the industry by storm for a decade, or maybe half a decade. People do like open world games, and I'm curious to know your thoughts as to why that is.
I think it's because it allows you, one, freedom. That's something we've talked a lot about. That's not to be underestimated, to do what you want, go where you want, do the side quest, don't do the main quest. You can play it into your schedule much easier. And especially as we get older, that is not something to sneer at as our free time diminishes. We're not high schoolers, college students, grad students, with unlimited time. I mean, I play in my work hours because it's slow, but whatever, for the most part.
Yeah, somehow you got a PhD and now play more video games than I do, and I don't have the PhD yet.
So why did people like it? The freedom? And let's not forget, Colin, this happened at about the time when most computers and most games you could do tens of square kilometers. You were able to construct massive open worlds, and the games wanted the players to see every part of it when they wanted. It's a celebration almost of gaming technology, if that makes any sense.
It does make sense, and it brings me to an additional point as well, which is that the things that we expect or hope for from our games have changed over time. Like I remember as a kid, every time we had a console leap, we focus on the graphics. The leap from Super Nintendo to Nintendo 64 is huge. From Nintendo 64 to GameCube, huge. Or PlayStation 1 to PlayStation 2. Even PlayStation 2 to PlayStation 3 slash Xbox, right? You see these appreciable levels of technology that means that games can appear to be more true to life. They can be more realistic. And I think that the assumption was for a long time that the closer to reality that you can be, the better designed the game is. So a game that I haven't played but is brought up a lot in these conversations is the Dreamcast classic Shenmue, in which it was revolutionary at the time because every NPC had their own schedule. They would be at certain places at certain times of day, which means that the place felt like the villages you were in would feel more lived in because they weren't just standing around. They had their own lives to go. And you would have to like go and do menial jobs in order to gain money in order to continue your quest. It's this verisimilitude that earned Shenmue its praise. But I think now we have reached a point where verisimilitude is not the goal anymore. I mean, most people don't even. What PlayStation 5 exclusives are there even? The only thing about PlayStation 5 that is actually better than the PlayStation 4 is a tiny upgraded graphical capability and faster load times. For the first time, we have a console generation in which we're not trying to get closer to life. We're just trying to make better games or faster games or whatever. It allows us to focus on aspects of game design that are actually fun as opposed to being real life.
Yeah, it's not this graphics as the white whale we're chasing. That seems to be, we may be approaching limitations with regards to current technology, as in we're not seeing these paradigm changes like we talked about anymore. Like from 2000 to 2000, say 3 or 4, massive changes in graphics.
Oh, yeah, for sure. In the past few years, not really.
How much is it, do you think, technology versus the shift in game design has changed from a graphics first perspective, if that makes sense?
No, I think that it has. Which is not to say that games don't look beautiful nowadays. They do. But let's speak more positively about open worlds. One of my favorite open world games is the PS4 Spider-Man. The Spider-Man 2 back in the day was also great, by the way, but I'm talking here about the PlayStation 4 games and its sequel, Miles Morales. And these games are gorgeous. I mean, New York City looks amazing. And in the PlayStation 5, you have ray tracing. You see all of these reflections. It looks beautiful. But growing up, it felt like the prettiness of the graphics were the point, and everything else was built around it to like get you to engage with those graphics. Instead, with Spider-Man, it feels like most of the emphasis was placed on movement. It was placed on the web slinging. And that's something that we really should talk about when it comes to how to make open worlds fun. The reason why Spider-Man is such an excellent open world game is because it's really fun to move around it. You know, you can do fast travel, but almost nobody does it because web swinging across the city is just fun. It's the same reason why I'm having fun with Sonic Frontiers. I was playing before we started recording, is that Sonic just feels good to control. You're always moving fast. And therefore, I don't mind when something is across the map because I can run there and it feels good. When it comes to a lot of these open world games, not necessarily open world RPGs, but open world games, how the character feels on a moment to moment gameplay basis is really important. Because we've talked a lot about how linear games can give us better storytelling. And something that I've been reflecting upon, because like look at back at the games that I last played. I played 3 Trails games in a row. I played FC. I played Hajimari no Kiseki. I played Kuro no Kiseki. Now we are playing Trails in the Sky SC. I've been playing a lot of Trails. And you know what that means, Kevin? That means cutscenes. That means a lot of cutscenes all of the time. And then a little bit of gameplay. And then cutscenes. One of the best things about open world games is that you are playing the game all the time.
Yes. Yes.
I think it's not an unimportant thing to bring up.
No, it's not. It's almost like the player is the receptacle for the story. There is one way to consume the story.
In which game are you talking about?
Games like Trails. You do it in this order. You get the story fed to you, often in cutscenes where you, the player, have no ability to influence the outcome. You are a passive observer.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, we've talked a lot on this podcast how it can be a good thing, but variety is a little bit of spice of life at times, right?
Playing a wide variety of games allows us to bring different perspectives. Trails in the Sky, FC, the other games, the sidebar episodes, and so forth. A pretty fundamental question about open world, about linear games. You are replaying these Trails games.
Yes.
That seems less usual, less normal than people replaying Skyrim or Fallout, whatever. Is it safe to say that linear games are less replayable because there's not as much surprise, not as much find something new for the story for the most part, but they are, on the other hand, they're more memorable?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And the reason why I say that is because I play a lot of RPGs. And I will, for the most part, play through the RPG, be happy I played through that RPG, and then put it away. And I have no inkling to play it again. Now, If it's re-released in some enhanced form 10, 15 years down the line, yeah, I'll pick it up. Mass Effect trilogy, right? But for the most
Yeah.
part, not something that you do. With Trails, once I finished playing through the series that was available in the West, I knew that I was going to play them again. And yeah, I see your face on the camera. It kind of surprised me too. Um, it kind of revealed to me how much I really liked them. And I think it's because of the unique narrative structure that Trails has, in which something that I really like being able to do now is take all of this knowledge of the world that I've amassed and go back to these earlier games and see what has already been there that I just didn't notice before, or see what's being foreshadowed, what's already been developed. At what point did were things clearly not thought through and then they thought through stuff later, which definitely is the case at times. And so for me, like to me, the reason why Trails itself is replayable is because of the excellence of its narrative and its world building, which is not shared by everything else, which is not the question that you asked me, but it is the point I wanted to make.
How often do you reread books, fiction books,
I
or
don't.
rewatch shows and movies?
I don't. I mean, I almost never rewatch shows unless it's a sitcom, and so at times I'll do that. I rewatch movies with friends, and I reread book series in order to talk to chicks. Like the last time I read through Harry Potter was to talk to chicks, and that'll probably never happen again. Just the way that Harry Potter is now being approached.
Oh, I thought you were going to say you'll never talk to a woman again.
No, I've talked to women, Kevin.
Well, specify the reference, Colin. No, but that's really interesting because I replay games and I reread book series a lot. Like there's one that's a web novel, like 9,000 pages altogether. I read it once a year. I've read it 3 times. I'm going to start my
Why?
third reread, my fourth time.
Don't
One of the
you
best.
don't you have other things to read? New experiences
Yeah.
to have?
Oh yeah. I mean, I'm on page 8,000 or so of a book series I'm going through for the first time. I read other things. I read about 4 or 5 books at a time.
Oh, I have to focus on one. If I divide my attention, it means that my attention is going nowhere.
Now, I wonder if that's something similar. How I have no problem replaying RPGs and non-RPGs, and I extend this into the other creative media I consume. Whereas for you, it seems it's a similar consistency on the other side.
Yeah, it is. Which doesn't say that rewatching or replaying never happens, but it's rare. It really is rare for me. And so for me, I would say, to return to your question, that linear games I think are more memorable because typically the writing is stronger and the writing is what makes it memorable. But to me, the only, like, okay, there are certain open games that are just meant to be played, and therefore you can replay them as long as you want. I mean, the Paradox games that we have and our Steam catalogs are testament to that, but that's not really what we're talking about. I played through The Witcher 3. I've played through it once. I I might play it again at some point because it's a great game, but it's not going to be anytime soon. I mean, I feel kind of bad because I feel like we spent most of this episode bashing on the existence of open world games. And yet I mean, there are really great ones out there. I love playing Grand Theft Auto 4. We both love playing The Witcher 3. Assassin's Creed Odyssey is amazing.
If you were to talk about why GTA 4 is really awesome in an RPG podcast that for a lot of our episodes focuses on story, how would you do so? How would you spend 20 minutes talking about GTA 4 in a way that's not just about GTA 4, but allows comparisons and conversations within the genre as a whole, if this makes sense?
No, I hear precisely what you mean. And I guess I would have to look at exploration and I have to look at mission structure and talk about how just the environment of GTA 4, like, it works as an open world game because it allows you to feel more immersed as Nico Bellic going through his story. And then, yes, you approach these different missions in whatever order you want. And then you have your self contained missions, which you can see. the same structure being followed when you play a game like The Witcher 3. But I think it's at moments like those in which you can actually make comparisons. It doesn't have to be, well, Nico Bellic does not gain levels, therefore we cannot compare them.
Oh yeah, and that's not what I'm saying. It just feels like the parts that makes open world games really fun doesn't allow for easy cross comparison with non-open world games. I maybe that's just me.
No, I mean they're very like we also talked about how in the middle, games can have varying degrees of openness. But when something is an open world game, you know it. It is a very different experience. I think that, maybe another episode that we want to do down the road would be how do you make an open world RPG successful? Because I think we've highlighted a lot of the negative sides of it. On our planning document here, we even say Witcher 3 is a great example of the game. Why is it the outlier? That might bear more time spent later on down the line to really focus in on the positive aspects or how you take the negative aspects and you fix them.
Doing justice to this type of game maybe warrants its episode devoted to it, where it's not being used, maybe unfairly by us, as a cudgel to make other types of games seem better in comparison. Because, like I said, either explicitly or implicitly, the parts I liked about Fallout 4 and New Vegas come from the parts that are not really the most representative of open world games.
Yeah.
And that's being unfair to them.
Well, I think that we're ending this episode with a bit of reflection, Kevin. Yeah, we're very self-confident men, but here maybe we need to think about changing our approach to some things. But I think this was an interesting discussion.
I think so as well. It raises more questions for us than it answered. I think that's good. This will change how I look at the upcoming chapters in SC, how I think about these genres, if genre is the right word, for the better, a more critical, careful eye. And that's a good thing.
I agree.
I'm Kevin. That's Colin. See you next time for another sidebar episode. Thanks for listening.
Thanks, everybody. Bye bye.